Our next speaker is Mr. Clovis Mwamba. Mr. Clovis Mwamba from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where Mr. Hammarskjöld was killed in suspicious circumstances. Just before the 1961 General Assembly, where he was scheduled to introduce his decolonization program for West Papua. Clovis was born in Congo in the mineral-rich province of Katanga. In 1960, he was 14 when he knew the state was thrown into chaos by the mercenaries, Western mining companies, and the foreign governments manipulating and supporting Katanga to secede. The Congo first Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba, was executed in Katanga. Clovis' father-in-law was the Chief of Staff of the Army in 1961 and was with Lumumba when Mobutu troops kidnapped him. A few months later, Secretary General Hammarskjöld was killed as he was flying to Katanga to negotiate with the leader of secession movement. A few months later, 40 years later, there were still violence and oppression in Congo. But by then, Clovis was an activist, a poet, psychologist, and a member of parliament, and jailed for criticizing the governments. 150 lasers in the morning and 150 lasers in the afternoon, he said. But eventually he fled and disguised along the Congo River and arrived in Melbourne in 2007. Welcome, Mr. Clovis Mwamba.
Hi, everyone. Mr. H, the hero of peace in Congo. UN Secretary General confronts plenty of obstacles in the Congo in 1960-61 as he tried with wit and diplomacy to save our new state from all the vultures trying to dismantle it, including the Congo Club in the UN Secretariat that was aligned with the Belgian government and the non-aligned country in the General Assembly. Because Belgium, our former colonizer, America, the USSR, and NATO founding members like France and Great Britain mobilized our two wealthy provinces, Katanga, gold, copper, uranium, and Kasai, diamonds. The Secretary General dispatched a UN peacekeeping force. He worked even harder after our first government was overthrown and Prime Minister Lumumba was murdered in January 1961. Then, just as he was finally starting to get somewhere, he himself was murdered. President Kennedy, in his address to the General Assembly, raised his finger against the vulture, those who govern without the consent of the governor, and implored God's blessing on the peacemakers and the principle of self-determination championed by Dag Hammarskjöld. 1960-1961, independence versus political realism. 1960 was the year of independence across Africa, and the indigenous forced laborers of the Belgian Congo were amongst those most keen to fly with the winds of change, while self-determination was championed by Secretary General Hammarskjöld. The colonial powers perceived it as a threat to their capital investment, and independence as a communist victory. Belgium agreed to our independence with one hand, but completely undermined it with the other. By 1961, independence had become political realism. Neo-colonialism, hatched behind the illusion of Cold War, spearheaded the charge. Those who support self-determination, like our Prime Minister and Hammarskjöld, were labeled communists and killed by the Belgian offshore military administration in Katanga. Beyond the uncertainty, as the media of the river free world tried to erase our proxy war-torn country from the world map, the Secretary General understood that political realism was encircling our decolonization, that the self-determination of the indigenous people was at stake, and that we weren't ready to fight the imperial powers, but Dag Hammarskjöld was. Hammarskjöld believed it was illegal for Belgium to invade our new state the day after it was recognized by the UN Security Council, and was horrified it took place on the date always celebrated as King Leopold II's pronouncement of the Congo as his own private property, and he maintained that NATO base should be dismantled. Hammarskjöld, the strategist, when Hammarskjöld landed in Katanga in 1960, Moshe Chombe, the provincial president of Katanga and a key protagonist of secession, met him at the airport and walked with him down the red carpet, ensuring the Secretary General salute the flag of his secessionist state as well as the UN flag. Katanga had always been an apartheid state. Only white people were granted citizenship. The Congolese indigenous were just forced labor or refugee. It rejected the multiracial UN security force and Ralph Bunche, the black UN representative. For this reason, the Secretary General strategically appointed a white man as the UN representative. Colonel O'Brien was Irish, from Sir Roger Casman's country. Hammarskjöld, champion of humanity, meets contradiction and betrayal. First, 2 weeks after our independence celebration in June 1960, foreign interests used the mineral-rich province of Katanga and Kasai to overthrow the government. The Secretary General convened the UN Security Council in July to discuss the crisis in Katanga and Kasai Committee Special of Katanga, which resulted in a resolution for Belgian troops to leave the Congo. On the same day in Paris, a meeting of NATO members agreed to murder Joe, code for Prime Minister Lumumba. Second, in July 1960, while Prime Minister Lumumba was meeting the Secretary General at the UN in New York, Mobutu, his chief of staff, backed by an area of foreign interests, including the CIA Binza group, was preparing a coup d'etat, staged with an announcement on the radio of a peaceful revolution on 14 September 1960. 3. The bell of self-determination began ringing for the indigenous people of the Congo in 1955. At the time, Lumumba had been successfully colonized and formally registered as a white man, and the Belgian Minister for Colony, Auguste Visseret, invited him to the 50th anniversary of the United Mining Company of Upper Katanga, UMHK. The UMHK was the fruit of King Leopold II's personal property, and Katanga was a state within a state, reserved for the strategic interests of the West. After independence, it was the site of plotting against the Congolese People's First Government. It was where Prime Minister Lumumba was murdered on the order of UMHK stakeholder and Belgian Minister for African Affairs, Count Linden. And it was where his corpse was butchered and thrown into drums of sulfuric acid. A Spider-Man in a country plagued by everlasting conflict. The Cold War, as it played out in Congo in 1960, was twofold. There was the leftist power, the so-called Lumumbists based in Stanleyville, Kisangani, and there were 4 far-right powers, civilian and military, within the central government in Leopoldville, and the 2 secession governments within the Special Committee of Katanga, one in Elizabethville, Katanga, and the other in Bakwanga, Kasai. The spider at the center of this invisible web of powerful players manipulating the country was Colonel Frederick van der Waal, who had created the Colonial Secret Service, Sûreté, in the Congo in 1948, and who had American allies in the CIA and the Congo Club in the UN Secretariat. Belgium's invasion in 1960 was a blatant violation of our state's territorial integrity, which is why the Secretary General inserted a UN peacekeeping force of 20,000 troops. However, the UN troops were unable to repel the invader, especially from Katanga and Kasai, because the Belgian soldiers were undistinguishable from thousands of white technicians hired by the UMHK mining company, who were professional mercenary recruited by Colonel van der Waal and founded by the CIA, a shining bridge for a newly independent country. That Hammarskjöld's optimistic hopes for the Congo didn't dim, despite the turmoil overwhelming the new state. The Swedish poet urged Congolese leaders to overcome their ethnic and politically motivated conflict, plead for people to reconcile with each other, and made himself available to meet the main secessionist leader Moshe Chombe in secret, away from his white mercenary mentor. Hang down your head, you're bound to die. Between 13th and 17th of January 1961 in Katanga, the ballad Tom Dooley in French was aired day and night on a student radio program that Belgian mercenaries were operating as Free Katanga Radio. On 13 January 1961, the Biza Group visited Lumumba in prison in Leopoldville, Kinshasa. 4 days later, 17th of January, Moshe Chombe in Katanga received Count Aspermon Linden's anniversary package Lumumba. This was after a court order sent Satan to the Jew from the Minister for African Affairs in Belgium, Count Aspermon Linden, to Colonel Marlier in Leopoldville, then via Colonel van der Waal to Chombe in Katanga. Satan being Lumumba and the Jew being Chombe. On 13th of September 1961, Tom Dooley was again being played on the radio. Was it a countdown or the projection of another saga? Since the death of Lumumba, all the Congolese leaders, except Chombe, had reconciled around the central government. And when Secretary General Hammarskjöld landed in Leopoldville on the 13th, he was saluted by the Binza group. Despite running from his staff, he agreed to meet Moshe Chombe at Ndola on the northern Rhodesian border. During the trip, his airplane was blown out of the sky. Ode for hope. The day Prime Minister Lumumba was killed, Dag Hammarskjöld was in Ridgeville, South Africa, meeting Black youth, a meeting that portended the eventual demise of both colonialism and apartheid. He described Lumumba's gruesome assassination to John Steinbeck as more than a crime. It was a major stupidity. No one in the long run profits from Lumumba's murder. Lists of all those outside the Congo who've continued to try to do so. I know that Congo's day of awakening with truth and decency will come. Thank you.